I came home from my sister's funeral on the Thursday afternoon, and my husband was sitting at the kitchen table with my daughter-in-law, and the way they looked up at me, not with grief, not with relief that I was finally home, but with something I can only describe as irritation. Like I had interrupted something important. That was the moment I knew. I didn't say a word. I set my overnight bag down by the door, walked to the sink, and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. I don't know why I remember that detail so clearly, but I do. My hands were completely steady. Let me back up. My name is Lorraine. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a bookkeeper for a regional insurance firm, raised 2 sons mostly on my own while my husband Walter, no, I won't use his name here. I'll call him what he was. While my husband traveled for work, built a small but real life in Clarksburg, West Virginia, and I genuinely believed that the hard years were behind me. Our youngest had graduated. The house was paid off. We had a savings account with enough in it to matter. I had planted roses along the back fence that were finally, after 5 years, starting to look like something. I was wrong. The hard years were just getting started, and the people who would make them hard were already sitting at my kitchen table. My sister Patrice died on a Monday, ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. She was 60 years old. She was the funniest person I've ever known, and she spent her last weeks telling the nurses jokes they had already heard from her the week before. I flew to Phoenix, where she lived, and I stayed with her for the final 10 days. I held her hand. I made phone calls. I arranged things. That is what I have always done. Arranged things, made sure everything was in order, kept the machinery of other people's lives running so they didn't have to think about it. I called my husband every evening. He said the right things. He asked about Patrice. He said he wished he could be there. He had taken a few days off work, he said, just to be home, just in case I needed anything from this end. I thought that was kind. I thought I was lucky to have him. When I walked through my own front door 4 days after Patrice's funeral, exhausted in a way I hadn't felt since my own mother died, the first thing I noticed was a coffee mug on the table that was not mine and was not my husband's. It had a little painted cardinal on the side. Patrice had a set of mugs like that, but Patrice was dead and her mugs were in Phoenix. This one was newer, cleaner. A stranger's mug in my kitchen. My daughter-in-law, my older son Devin's wife, I'll call her Faye, was sitting across from my husband, and they were not talking. They were just sitting, which, now that I think about it, is somehow worse. People who are just friends talk when they're sitting together. People who are something else go quiet when the door opens. "You're back early," my husband said. I was not back early. I had told him my exact flight time 3 separate times. "Where's Devin?" I asked Faye. "Working," she said, and she picked up her phone and looked at it, which is what people do when they don't want to look at you. I said I was tired and needed to lie down. No one argued. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed, and looked at my hands, still steady. I have thought about that a lot since. I think my body understood something my mind was still refusing to process. The next morning, I found a receipt in the pocket of my husband's jacket. I was not snooping. I was doing laundry. I have done his laundry for 31 years, and he has never once thought to check his pockets. The receipt was from a restaurant I had never been to. A nice one, not the kind of place we went together, dated the Saturday before, 2 days after I'd left for Phoenix. Dinner for 2. A bottle of wine that cost more than we spent on groceries most weeks. I put the receipt back in the pocket. I finished the laundry. I made coffee, and I sat at the kitchen table, and I thought about Patrice, who had told me once, years ago, that I was too good at making peace with things that didn't deserve peace. "You smooth everything over, Lorraine," she said. "You're so good at it that eventually you can't even see what you smoothed over anymore." I had laughed at the time. I am not laughing now. I want to say clearly that I did not cry. I know some people expect that part of the story. The collapsing, the confrontation, the tears. It didn't happen like that. Something in me that had been quietly, slowly bending for a very long time simply went still. Like a clock that runs down, not with a clang, but with a last small tick and then silence. I started paying attention. I have been a bookkeeper for 31 years. I notice numbers. I notice when things don't add up. What I discovered over the next 3 weeks, going back through our shared accounts with the careful, neutral attention I give to any ledger, was not a single dramatic betrayal, but a long, patient erosion. Cash withdrawals I hadn't made. A credit card I didn't know we had. Hotel charges in cities he had told me were work trips, and some of them were, probably, but not all of them. Not a restaurant in our own town for two on a Saturday night when he told me he'd eaten at home. I found 18 months of it. The thing about being a bookkeeper is that you learn very early that people who steal, and I use that word deliberately, people who take what isn't theirs rarely do it once. They test. They take a little. They wait. Nothing happens. They take a little more. They build systems. They become very comfortable. They start to believe they are invisible. My husband had become very comfortable. I did not confront him. I am aware this surprises people. But I had watched my own mother confront my father once in the kitchen when I was 11 years old, and I watched him deny everything she knew to be true so smoothly, so completely, that by the end of the conversation, my mother was apologizing to him. I swore to myself then that if I ever found myself in that kitchen, I would not be my mother. I would not hand someone the opportunity to make me doubt what I had seen with my own eyes. So I made an appointment with a lawyer instead. Her name was, well, she was a small woman with reading glasses on a chain and an office full of plants, and she had been practicing family law in this county for 27 years. She looked at what I'd brought, the printed statements, the receipts, the dates cross-referenced with his travel calendar, which I had photographed, and she set it all down on her desk and said, "How long have you known?" 3 weeks, I said. "How long has it been going on?" "At least 18 months, possibly longer. I only went back 18 months. She nodded. She said something then that I have repeated to myself many times since. She said, "The spouse who documents never loses." I asked her what I needed to do. She told me. I went home and I started doing it. The first thing she told me was this: do not move out. Do not make a scene. Do not give him any reason to hide assets or accelerate a timeline. People who are comfortable, stay comfortable. Let him stay comfortable. The second thing she told me was to open my own account at a different bank and begin, quietly, to move my portion. I had always had my own income. That had always been true, but I had been pooling it into our joint account for 31 years, trusting that what was ours, trusting that the math would always come out even. It had not. The third thing she told me, and this is the part that required me to be someone I had not been in a very long time, was to find out the full picture before I moved, because once he knew, everything would change, and I needed to understand completely what I was dealing with. What I was dealing with was this: my daughter-in-law, Faye. I am aware of how that sounds. I am aware that some people reading this will have their own opinions about daughters-in-law, about younger women, about all of it. I am not interested in those opinions. What I am interested in is the truth, which is this: Faye had been in my home, had eaten at my table, had called me, and I want you to understand that this still catches me somewhere behind my sternum when I think about it, had called me mom, not in a casual way, in a deliberate way, the way people say a word they want to mean. My son Devin did not know, or perhaps I should say my son Devin did not know yet, because the other thing I discovered in the careful and very quiet weeks that followed was that Devin had been covering for them. Not knowingly, I think, but he had been used. His work schedule, his trips, his absences, they had been the convenient frame around which everything else was arranged. He was a door they used because it was unlocked. I want to tell you about a Sunday in October because I think it matters. I had driven out to the county records office, which is a thing that sounds very dramatic, but is actually just a beige building with fluorescent lights and a woman named Sandra who has worked there for decades and knows where everything is. I was looking at property records. My husband had mentioned, once, casually, a friend who was selling a parcel of land outside of town, and what a shame it was that we hadn't had the liquidity to invest. What I found in that beige building with those fluorescent lights was that we had, apparently, had the liquidity. There was a parcel of land, 42 acres transferred 14 months ago. The name on it was not mine. I sat in my car in the parking lot of that county records office for 22 minutes. I know because I looked at the clock when I got in and looked at it again when I started the engine. I did not cry. I thought about Patrice. I thought about what she would say. I thought she would probably say something so darkly funny that I would have laughed against my will. And then I thought that she was not here to say it. And that was the closest I came to breaking that afternoon in that parking lot, not because of the land, because of her absence. Then I drove home and I made dinner. Here is what I had by the time I was ready: 31 years of tax returns, which are joint documents and which I had every right to copy. Bank statements going back 2 years, the property record, a credit card statement in his name alone that had been mailed to our house and which I had opened because I am his wife and did not know it existed, and which my lawyer confirmed I had every right to open. Photographs I had taken of the receipt, a timeline, everything dated, labeled, organized in a blue binder that I kept in the trunk of my car because it was the one place in our house that was entirely mine. My lawyer called it a very clean file. I called it 31 years of paying attention, finally pointed in the right direction. I want to talk about my son Devin for a moment because this is the part of the story I have thought about the longest and with the most complicated feelings. Devin is 34 years old. He is, in many ways, a good man. He is good at his job. He is kind to strangers. He calls me on my birthday and not just on my birthday. He was not a part of what his wife was doing. I believe that fully. But he had also, over the course of those 18 months, noticed things I know he had because I know my son, and had chosen not to look too closely. He had chosen the version of his life that was easiest to maintain. I understand that. I had done it myself for longer than I want to admit. But understanding something and accepting the consequences of it are two different things. I did not tell Devin what I knew before I was ready. My lawyer advised against it, and she was right. But also, honestly, and this is the part that is hard to say, I was not sure what he would do with the information. I was not sure whose corner he would stand in, and I could not afford to be wrong about that. The morning I was ready, I called Devin first. I asked him to come to my house before work. Just him. He came. He looked tired. He sat at the kitchen table and I put coffee in front of him, and I sat across from him and I showed him 3 things: the property record, the credit card statement, and a photograph I had taken from my phone of a series of text messages that had been visible on Faye's screen when she left her phone on my counter one afternoon and walked out to check the mail. She had not password protected it. That, too, I have thought about since. The carelessness of people who have been comfortable for too long. Devin did not speak for a very long time. Then he said, "How long have you known?" I said, "Long enough." He put his face in his hands. Not a dramatic gesture. Devin is not a dramatic person, just a quiet, private collapse, a man recalculating everything he thought he knew about his own life. I let him have that. I sat there and I drank my coffee and I let him have it. He looked up after a while and said, "What do you need from me?" That was the moment I knew I had my son back. Not that I had lost him. I do not think I ever fully lost him. But there had been a wall between us for 2 years that I hadn't been able to name. And now I could name it. And now it was coming down. I told him what I needed. He did it. The papers were filed on a Wednesday. I was not in the building when my husband was served. My lawyer handled it. I was instead at a nursery outside of town looking at roses. I bought 2 new climbing varieties I had been eyeing for a year. They are planted along the east fence now, and they are going to be extraordinary. My husband called me 11 times that Wednesday, 43 times over the following 4 days. I answered on the 5th day once because my lawyer said I should, and because I think there is a difference between silence as strength and silence as cowardice, and I wanted him to hear from me directly in my own voice that I understood exactly what he had done, that I had always understood exactly what he had done, and that I was not interested in his explanation. He said he could explain. I said, I don't doubt that. You're very good at explaining. I hung up. There's a kind of thing that happens once you have made a decision that you have put off for too long, where everything around you gets very clear and very quiet. The noise you didn't even know was constant suddenly stops, and you realize how much of your energy was going toward maintaining a reality that was not real. I felt it the morning after the papers were filed. I woke up early, before 6, and the house was entirely silent, and I made coffee, and I sat on the back porch and looked at the rose fence in the early light, and I thought, this is mine. This has always been mine. The 31 years of careful work, the tax returns, the paid-off mortgage, the savings account that my lawyer had already moved into my name, only mine. The roses, mine. The steady hands. The land. The 42 acres he had transferred without my knowledge. That was a longer process. It did not resolve in a week or a month. Financial misconduct in a marriage is not simple, and I am not going to pretend it was. There were months of it. Court dates. A mediator who used the word equitable. So many times I started counting. My lawyer, bless her in her reading glasses and her office full of plants, did not lose once, not once, because we had documentation, because I had spent 3 weeks in the quiet building a file that was, as she said, very clean. The land is in my name now. Faye and Devin separated in November. That was their decision, not mine, and I have tried to stay out of it as much as a mother can stay out of her child's heartbreak. Devin moved back into his old room for 3 months, which at 63 I had not anticipated, but which I found, honestly, to be a comfort. He fixed the gutter that had been pulling away from the eave for 2 years. He learned to make my mother's chicken and dumpling recipe, which I had been meaning to teach him for a decade. We watched a lot of old movies. We talked, really talked, the way we had when he was young, and it was just the two of us and his little brother, and the world was complicated, but it was ours. My younger son, Craig, lives in Portland, and he called me when he heard. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry I wasn't there." I told him the truth. I told him I'd handled it, that it was done, that I was fine. He said, "Yeah, but, I should have been there." And I said, "You're here now." Which is something Patrice would have said, and I knew it when I said it, and I let myself feel that for a moment before I changed the subject. I want to say something to whoever is reading this or listening to it or watching. I know some people will hear this story and think about anger. I was angry, of course I was, but anger was not the thing that got me through. The thing that got me through was what I have spent 63 years building, the habit of paying attention, the discipline of documentation, the patience to wait until the right moment, and the absolute bedrock certainty, which came from 31 years of keeping books, of making columns balance, of trusting that the numbers do not lie, that the truth will always eventually show itself in the record. He thought I was just doing laundry. I want to say something about Patrice, too, because I started this story with her and it wouldn't be honest to end it without her. She did not get to see any of this. She died before I found that receipt, before I made that appointment, before the papers were filed and the land was returned, and Devin learned to make dumplings. She never knew that I finally took her advice about not smoothing things over. I have thought about how to feel about that. I have decided that she knows. That is not a thing I can prove any more than I can prove a lot of things I believe. But she told me once when she was sick and we were sitting in her kitchen eating the terrible soup I had made because I am a better bookkeeper than I am a cook, she said, "Lorraine, promise me you'll stop carrying everyone else's weight when I'm gone." I said, "I'm not carrying anyone's weight." She gave me a look that only a younger sister can give an older sister, a look that contains 30 years of knowing exactly who you are. And she said, "Promise me anyway." I promised. I think she would say I kept it. The roses came in beautifully this spring, both new varieties. The east fence is covered. I sit on the back porch in the mornings with my coffee and I look at them, and sometimes I think about everything that happened and sometimes I just look at the roses. Some mornings it is enough just to look at the roses. I have thought a lot about what actually happened in this story. Not the legal part, the human part. Because the legal part is just paperwork at the end of the day. The human part is the thing that took me a long time to name. What happened is that I spent 31 years being very good at a thing that quietly worked against me. I was good at keeping the peace, good at smoothing things over, as Patrice used to say, good at absorbing friction so that the people around me didn't have to feel it. And for a long time, I told myself that was generosity. Now I think it was something else. I think it was a habit I had built so early and kept so long that I had stopped being able to see it clearly. The thing about habits like that is that they don't just affect you. They send a message to the people around you. They tell people what you will accept. And people, over time, tend to believe what they are shown rather than what they are told. I told myself I had standards, but what I showed for 31 years was that I would keep going regardless. That the machinery of the household, the marriage, the family would run because I would make it run, and nothing would be required in return. That is not someone else's fault. That is mine. I want to say that clearly because I think it matters. And here is where the cause and the effect come together. In my experience, what you build with patience, you can also dismantle with patience. I did not become someone different when I found that receipt. I used exactly the same skills I had always had. The attention to numbers, the habit of documentation, the ability to sit still and observe before reacting. I just pointed them at the truth instead of away from it. That is the only thing that changed. The direction. Devin asked me once, after everything was settled, how I had stayed calm through all of it. He said he would have been furious. I told him I was furious. I just didn't hand that fury to someone who would have used it against me. There is a difference between feeling something and performing it, and I had learned that difference. Maybe too late in some ways, but not too late in the ways that counted. Patrice told me to stop carrying everyone else's weight. I think what she meant was your strength belongs to you first. You can give from it, yes, but you cannot give it all away and then wonder why you have nothing left to stand on when the ground shifts. That is not virtue. That is just exhaustion with a better name. I am 63 years old and I am learning, still learning, I think we are always still learning, that the most honest thing I can do with whatever years I have left is to be as clear-eyed about my own choices as I was about those bank statements. To keep a clean file on myself, too. To notice when I am smoothing something over that deserves to stay rough. To let the columns balance. The roses came in this spring. That is not a metaphor. They are just roses. But they are mine, and I planted them, and they are extraordinary.